now.
Yeah, ok. Hello, Fabiana. Thank you.
Hello, welcome to the Living in Space Initiative, second and ongoing series of webinars. We appreciate the opportunity to have you folks involved and with us in the seminar today. Our goal is to go through and help draw out the confluence of interests and see how we can most effectively provide for the understanding necessary to pursue the initiatives with respect to living in the space environment in the most constructive manner possible, leveraging all of our available resources. I'd like to introduce you now to Joe Pelton. He's the former dean of the International Space University, and author of a number of space books, and he's going to chair our first set of speakers and panel discussions. Joe, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Gary. We do have a very interesting panel of experts, namely astronauts who have flown in space. I'll start with Bob Thirsk, who is a Canadian astronaut who has, I think, the record number of 204 hours in space. He has, I think, the distinction of receiving a degree in orbit. Was the first person to receive a degree in orbit. Next, we have Soyeon Yi, who was recruited from the entire population of South Korea and went up in orbit on the Mir. She has many distinctions, but the one I remember most is she sang Fly Me to the Moon in space. And then I had the opportunity to accompany her in Australia when we had just finished a test of our students, and I was part of a quartet that accompanied her as she sang to the audience in Adelaide, Australia. Last we have, not least, Jeff Hoffman, who is known for many things. Perhaps one of the highlights was repairing the Hubble telescope and restoring it to its full capabilities. And also, what we do have in common, Bob and Sung Yi and Jeff, is that we all have been faculty for the International Space University and taught in programs around the world for students who have a fascination and want to learn about all aspects of space, because that's a fully interdisciplinary program. And speaking of interdisciplinary, I forgot to mention that Bob is indeed that. He got his medical degree from McGill University, where I've been a research associate, and he also got his MBA at MIT at the Sloan School. So I think all of our astronauts tend to be interdisciplinary people who want to know about all aspects of space. And we are going to start today with a discussion of what are the risks and concerns that we have that we should be addressing as we plan to live in space. So in talking to Bob, he mentioned the issue of space debris, that every time they had to maneuver the International Space Station to avoid debris, that's certainly that risk came to mind. And also, as we know, that radiation and radiation sickness is a clear issue and a problem that we need to deal with. We've been protected when we've been in low Earth orbit from the magnetic shield that we have on Earth. But as we move to Artemis with the moon program, and particularly as we try to go to Mars and send astronauts to be on the surface of Mars, we have a real issue with the radiation sickness. So I'm going to start with Bob Thirsk, who has had a lot of experience at 204 hours in space, to talk about his concerns and what we can do to address the issue of space debris, because we maybe will be deorbiting the space station in 2030, but there's plan to put up at least 2 private space stations. And we really do have to be concerned about not only astronauts, but people who are sort of citizen astronauts who may go up to these private space stations. So Bob, why don't you start?
I have to speak up for Bob. You said 204 hours in space.
Right.
He's actually spent 204 days in space.
Days. I did mean days, but good for you.
I know you meant it, but just for the
Right.
audience, I
Right.
figured we'd better correct it.
Right. Okay. Bob, you're on. And then talk about space debris and anything you want to say about radiation. And then we will go to Jeff and then to Soyeon Yi. Oh, you're muted, Bob.
Thank you, Joe, for your kind words of introduction, and thank you, Jeff, as well. Yes, 204 days in space was it was a privilege to live and work in space for on 2 space flights, including the highlight of my career, which was the International Space Station expedition. You know, I think spacefarers, when we come back from flight, really understand that it's a privilege to fly in space, but this privilege comes with a responsibility for the long-term welfare of space, but also our planet and also for our planet's inhabitants. There's no place in space for the careless, the exploitative, the selfish, and the defiant. And one of the things that I've learned now towards the end of my career is that, you know, with these remarkable new advances in rocket technology that have reduced the cost of launching spacecraft and payloads and people to space, it's opened up low Earth orbit to a number of new entrepreneurs. And I have to ask myself whether or not the new players that are rushing in to take advantage of these economic opportunities, whether or not they're going to be mindful of the repercussions of their actions, or will space become another marketplace that's dominated by billionaire-backed multinationals with little consideration for the privilege of operating there. And I'm also worried about the safety of flight as well. You know, emergency situations can occur during a space flight at any time, from launch to landing, or any time in between as well. When things go wrong in space, they go terribly wrong. And all participants need to understand this and regard safety as their top priority. You're right, Joe. When I was aboard the International Space Station, there were 3 incidents where we had to do something called a debris avoidance maneuver, which means that we predicted that a piece of debris was on a conjunction or on an intersecting course with the International Space Station. And we were asked to take countermeasures just in case that debris did hit the station. Thankfully, the debris did not. But I'm worried that lessons have not been learned, because the debris problem is getting worse. The debris in space is growing at 3 to 5% per year, which means that I am outraged when military forces of spacefaring nations feel compelled to test the operability of their anti-satellite systems in space. You know, space is already dangerous enough without adding, you know, some deliberate man-made hazard. And the morally unthinkable is now being considered as well. Last year, the Secure World Foundation and this year, the New York Times reported that a nuclear-armed anti-satellite weapon is being developed by a foreign state. And if deployed in space, and if it's triggered, such a weapon would destroy a wide array of inhabited platforms, as well as military, civilian, and commercial spacecraft as well. It would render low Earth orbit inhabitable, and it would be a tragic outcome for global society. Anyways, I don't know, but it seems that human behavior just doesn't seem to learn. We make similar mistakes whenever we move from the discovery part of exploration to the exploitative part of discovery, and I'm worried about that. Well, Joe, I think I've ranted for too long.
Okay.
I'm going to cover.
Well, let's go to Soyeon Yi and hear her thoughts on space debris, what we should be doing about it. Should the UN Committee on Peaceful Use of Outer Space try to move toward things like space traffic management, which many people feel is a solution to deal with the debris? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you so much. Anyway, I'm so honored to be here and talk with everyone. And if I also correct a little bit of my introduction, I've been in International Space Station rather than Mir, but I understand why Joe talking about Mir because I've been training and fly with the Soyuz. So that might lead you to the Mir, but Mir retired when I was in college. So even if I really want to go there, I couldn't go there. But anyway, yeah. When Bob talked about all those kind of space traffic problem, that reminds me of the things related with the medical thing, because many of the countries and then developed medical thing, and we always thinking about the condition after something happened. So of course we can make a huge profit if you use the drug after having the symptom, after having the disease. But best way to protect the humankind is prevention. So whatever things, either human or kind of machines or anything, once it's broken, and even if you fix perfectly, you still have a scars and you still have a problem. You still have a potential to have a problem in the future. So always it's better to prevent to do something rather than the conditioning after. So when I talked about the safety issue on the space debris and a kind of weapon, and we shouldn't do that kind of thing. And then some people said we have AI, we have a lot of technology, we can grab the waste with the high technology spacecraft. And I'm so welcome to have all those kind of technology, but if we can prevent before, prevention is the best way to do that. So that's the most safe way to work together rather than hate each other and forgive each other. We don't fight all the way from before. It's always best way to live together. So that's my kind of thought and insight and idea. And if I add to the safety on top of the space traffic, more like a radiation, as a female, and we have some issue about the higher radiation level for the female and woman astronaut in the future. But whenever we talked about that, not only radiation level and dosage of anything, but also all the medical issue, we don't have enough data to make the regulation for the female astronaut because relatively really few data, because still every single country has a cap numbers and 30% or 50% of the female right now, but historically 50, 60 years, we have a lot of male data more than the female. So it's really hard to convince and ensure that the level of the dosage and a lot of the medical regulation for the female, frankly speaking. And also, it's harder to share the private medical data as a female astronaut if we have a really few number. For example, let's say some woman health related data we needed to share with a researcher, but there's only a handful of the Asian female astronaut. And then if I say, can you make the anonymous? And they said, yeah, age span is a certain level, and an Asian and woman, then you can find only 2 female. Then it's exactly same as with the name on it and tag on it. And then all other female astronauts are same. And especially woman health related data is so sensitive and private. So without having the more number of the females, and then is kind of more comfortable to make the anonymous without sharing the private healthcare data, it's really, really hard to set the regulation and then convince the health and safety for all the female future astronaut. So that would be also one of the concern, as I think, as a female.
Well, can I just add a question here? The National Academy in the US has recommended that there just be one standard of 600 millisieverts for all astronauts, with the idea that all astronauts would then consult with their own doctors and what have you, decide what risk that they are willing to take, rather than having, as NASA has today, different standards for women of childbearing age and so on. What do you think about that approach? Because NASA has not adopted that idea
Yeah,
yet.
so as I know, officially and unofficially, many of the agencies not adopted yet because they cannot be sure. Without having the enough data to be sure, of course, maybe Bob also agree with me, every single people has a different level and different kind of dosage level kind of thing. So you cannot make the huge dominant universal data for everybody. But at least we should have a lowest level to be safe. And to do that, we need enough data. So as a space agency and in government, if they cannot be convinced whether enough data is a little bit hesitating to move everything forward, because they needed to be liable what if something happened. So I think to make everybody convinced and ensure that we need more data to show them, yeah, this level is enough safe for everyone, regardless of the race or gender and that kind of thing. But we don't have enough data for every single genders and races and then peoples and age. So yeah, need more people who fly, but we don't want to test it for them. So we don't want to send the people only for the data. But if we stack more peoples and more diverse, naturally we can add the more data. So that might be the optimal way to do that, I think.
Well, Jeff, let's bring you into the conversation. What do you think we are doing, let's say, in terms of the Kessler syndrome? What do you think the dangers are that if we continue with all of these large-scale constellations in space with very high likelihood of more collisions, where do you think we are and where do you think we're going and what should we be doing about it? You're muted. You're on mute.
Yeah, well, we're headed towards the Kessler syndrome, as you said. And if we don't make a change in public policy, we could render low Earth orbit unusable and be trapped on the surface of the Earth, which would be tragedy for humanity. You know, the problem we're facing, though, is it's an international problem, but it has to be solved by national space agencies. There's no international space agency that can launch a mission to deorbit large satellites, which are now dead, which threaten to make more space debris if they ever collide. You know, we've made some progress in preventing second stages from blowing up and things, but the huge number of satellites that are launched, I'm very concerned. I mean, I know that, you know, SpaceX says the Starlink, they can keep track of all of their, you know, tens of thousands of satellites and make sure they don't have collisions. And then One World is going to put up a constellation and the Chinese are going to put up a constellation. Can SpaceX coordinate with all the Chinese satellites? And I just, we need some changes in space law. But ultimately, maybe it's sad to say, but often we humans don't address problems until there's a catastrophe. When we get the first major collisions with some of these communications constellations, maybe the private sector will realize that it's in their economic interest to clean up space. We've had some ideas. We know we need to bring down a lot of large dead satellites, and that I think we know how to do. How you get rid of all the, tens or hundreds of thousands of small pieces of debris, that's a big technological problem. But um, I wish I had an answer for you, Joe. I mean, we know what has to be done. It's the problem that who is going to pay to do it? Should the US pay to bring down a Russian dead satellite? I mean, legally, we're not allowed to do that anyway, but even if we were, who's responsible for that? So I hope we get a little bit further towards a solution before we have a major catastrophe, but I'm afraid to say that I'm pessimistic.
Right. Well, I was talking to David Kendall of Canada, who was the president and chair of the Committee on the Peaceful Use of Outer Space, and he says that it took 14 years for them to come up with the mitigation procedures, and they are voluntary in scope, so there's no police to enforce that. And he's very pessimistic that the Committee on Peaceful Use of Outer Space can do it. And the first step that was taken that let them get agreement was the group of space agencies meeting together that came up with the mitigation procedures, in which the UN committee then basically said, yes, largely this is what we can endorse, and got that. So maybe the committee that does exist, the Interagency Committee on Space Debris, could move forward to recommend new and better procedures, and particularly endorse the idea of space traffic management, which most spacefaring countries think is a good idea, except Russia and I think China have been sort of reluctant to move ahead with that. But clearly, we need new international agreements, it would seem, and with some urgency, greater urgency. And I hope that your thought that a catastrophe will be the only way that we get to new and better procedures and maybe new capabilities. But do you want to comment about radiation, and particularly what do we do when we try to send people to Mars? That's a real challenge.
Yeah, let me comment on Sun Yi's what she said about letting the astronauts and their personal physicians ultimately make the decisions. I'm sorry, but I don't think from an ethical standpoint that astronauts are the people who should make the decision about whether they should fly, how much radiation they should take. Every astronaut wants to fly. You ask, I mean, it was the same question. Should you ask the crew on launch day, do they think that things are safe enough? Should they really go fly? Every astronaut wants to fly.
I agree. Yeah, I
and,
totally
and,
agree.
and so I think I can't comment on the data, men and women. Historically, the argument was that there are, a lot of the numbers on radiation tolerance, they're organ specific. Different organs have different sensitivity to radiation, and obviously women have some different organs than men do. And historically, that's been the reason for the difference in the levels of radiation tolerance. It's a serious ethical question. I don't want to get into it any deeper. I think Soyeon has has said correctly, we need more data, and I'll leave it to the scientific experts. But as far as, what we're going to do, we could talk a lot about radiation shielding. There's a lot of work that's been done with some new technologies, boron nitride nanotubes, that sort of thing, and those are definitely a step in the right direction. But in the long run, we are going to be exposed to levels of radiation that are significantly high. There's two things I would say. I mean, long-term exposure to radiation. So we're not talking about, large single solar flares, which could be dangerous. Those we think we know how to protect against by shielding. But the long-term exposure to galactic cosmic radiation, which we cannot shield against. First of all, the result of that is an increase in the probability of dying from leukemia. That's what they base a lot of these limits on, is keeping the increased chance of dying from radiation-induced leukemia less than 3% increase. Well, our ability to treat cancer is improving. So, maybe it's worth taking the risk. The second thing I would say is there are so many risks which we're going to take to go to Mars that maybe, adding a few % chance of, dying a little bit earlier when you're 80 years old is in the noise as far as the overall risk posture of a mission to Mars. And the last thing is there have been some interesting works in biology, and here we're getting into a little bit of science fiction maybe, but we know there are radiodurans bacteria, tardigrades, worms, which can tolerate enormous quantities of radiation because they have enzymes which are much better at repairing DNA than we humans have. I read an article where they transplanted a gene from a tardigrade into a mouse to increase the mouse's radiation tolerance level. So right now, changing the human genome is ethically prohibited here on Earth. But possibly when we learn more about how to do these things, if we could genetically improve human tolerance against radiation, we would be a step much closer to becoming an interplanetary species. Again, that's for the future. It's a little bit science fiction right now, but the progress in genetic manipulation right now, mostly for medical purposes, is going great guns, and someday it will be possible to do this, and I think that then we'll have to deal with the ethical implications of permanently changing the human genome.
Well, let's go back to Bob.
Joe, can I add a little bit, some small consideration?
Right. Well, let's go to Bob, and then we'll come back to you. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Bob, let's talk about one other aspect, and that is microgravity and the impacts on reshaping the skull and maybe going blind if you're in space a long time and so on. Have you been looking at issues like going to Mars and whether we need artificial gravity for such missions to be in space for a long time, both coming and going?
When I think about the environmental parameters of space flight that can have an impact on human health and well-being, I think about ultraviolet radiation. I think about ionizing radiation that we've just been talking about. Talk about the acceleration and deceleration environment. I talk about lunar and Martian dust. Talk about isolation and confinement. But you're right, Joe. The most profound parameter or effect of the space environment on human physiology is without question weightlessness. It's probably true to say that every single organ system in the body is impacted by weightlessness. During shorter duration space flights, such as we do aboard the space station, and what we did aboard the space shuttle in low Earth orbit, we're particularly concerned about the cardiovascular system, the bones, the muscles, the immune system as well. But when we go interplanetary for longer periods of time, 2.5-year missions round trip to get to Mars and back, we know sort of what weightlessness does to the body, but how do we develop countermeasures for a 2.5-year mission? The International Space Station has wonderful bone and muscle countermeasures right now. The primary countermeasure is in-flight exercise. So we have aerobic exercise equipment. We have muscle resistance equipment as well. But the issue for a Mars flight will be the limitations on power, volume, and mass that the spacecraft will allow us. So we need just as effective countermeasures for the Mars mission to counteract some of these weightlessness-induced problems. But we're not going to have the same volume, same mass, and we're going to have to rely on ingenious people that come up with new ways of protecting us, developing even better countermeasures than are currently used in low Earth orbit.
Well, I think Joe Carroll is going to be talking about tether systems, and maybe you can spin systems. But let's go to Adriano, who had a comment.
Yes, thank you. Just a small comment. I think this is a very, very important point that we are making about radiations and zero and low gravity, low and zero gravity. And if we talk about astronautical missions, is one thing. If we talk about civilians living and working in space, that's what we try to discuss in these meetings. It's quite different because we have a problem of well, astronauts are military. They are trained, and however, they are supposed to face some risk because it's unfortunately this is in the destiny of the military. They have no civil rights. They are in a mission, and they should go. And of course, as Jeffrey said before, all astronauts want to fly, therefore they are also happy to do it, of course. But if we think to people living and working in the cislunar space, I'm not very much concerned about missions to Mars, because that will be exploration mission and for many years yet. And but I am concerned about when we will start, I hope in a not so distant future, working and living in Lagrange points in the cislunar space on the moon for industrial activity, for tourism activities, and so on. Then there is a problem of civil rights. There is for civilians. There is a problem of protecting human life and health. And as if you take an airplane, a normal airline, you're supposed to be protected until a certain limits, of course, and so that will be when we will start to living in space. So, sorry for this is more.
I'm looking at the clock, and I did want to discuss a little bit about again going to Mars in particular, and even the moon, of the cost and expense and difficulty of resupply, and the possibility that maybe we could figure out ways to become more self-sufficient on longer-term missions. And we know that we can grow crops on the International Space Station. There is a research project by NASA to not only excavate water and then use electrolysis to create oxygen, and then have a purification system so that you can generate oxygen on the moon. So if we look at the difficulties of going to Mars in particular, if we can get systems to be self-sufficient, to the regeneration concepts, like we had the Biosphere 2 in Arizona that failed. What do you think we can do to become more self-sufficient? Everything from using waste to agriculture to generating oxygen or what have you. Do you think there's prospects to be more self-sufficient on long-term missions? Let's start with Jeff.
Yeah, well, the answer, of course, is as much as possible, learn to use local resources. You mentioned mining water on the moon. There are other ways to get oxygen as well, and to make metals, molten metal electrolysis, for instance. On MOXIE, I was the deputy principal investigator for the MOXIE experiment, which for 2.5 years produced oxygen on Mars. We took carbon dioxide out of the Mars atmosphere and ran it through solid oxide electrolysis to split out oxygen from the carbon dioxide. So we know we can do these things. It takes a tremendous amount of electrical power. Any kind of electrochemical process is going to require tens of kilowatts to work on a human scale. So we're almost certainly talking about some sort of nuclear power plants. I don't really think that we have the capability at this point to be completely self-sufficient. What we need, there will be a certain frequency of resupply flights. On the moon, it can be fairly frequent. On Mars, we can only do it with our current technology every 26 months. So if I'm talking about having a scientific research station on Mars that has to be self-sufficient, you're going to need logistically to have enough backup supplies brought with you from the Earth so that if you miss one of the resupply flights, you can survive for another 26 months, or else you have the capability of coming home. So I think it's a combination of learning to use as much of the local resources as possible, proper logistics planning, and also planning for the potential emergencies when you don't have the resupply. So it's a combination of all those things.
So Bob, do you want to add some? Oh, no, go ahead, Soyeon Yi.
I thought it will go to the Bob.
No,
Yeah.
no,
But
no.
anyway, yeah. So actually, I think in that kind of matter, Adriano's comments is a kind of good bridging, because depends on how many and then how long is always biggest question. Because not only because of the technology, but also because of the break-even point as a business, it's a huge factor. Because let's say it's in Mars, just 6 of the exploration people, but long duration, or we have 100 people for a month, or 1,000 of the people forever, depending on the number of the peoples and durations and kind of like that. It always have a different question. Should we kind of regenerate or making everything out of the local resource, or it's better to resupply regularly, and even if it's expensive or even if it's really long time? As Jeff said, it takes us several 10 months, but there is a business benefit to have a resupply than the build the old infrastructures and making everything's a crazy amount of the money. We better plan kind of back to back and enough resource to bring over there. But what if we already sent 1,000 people and then they should be over there, and then there's no capability to send everything for that kind of many people and for long duration? But no matter what, we should build, then think about it kind of thing. So, but the reason why in the low Earth orbit, we tried to make the aquaponics or some planting seed. Even during my space flight, I brought the seed and then planting the seed, and we check it out, how they grow. We realized that there's a lot of resistance, not because of the gravity, but because of all other aspects. We realized that. I think that is the preparation for the future. What if we really need, no matter how much money necessarily, if we should do that, we should do that to save the people. But if the commercial first, they always thinking about the break-even point and then ROI and everything, then we can think about other way to do that. So yeah, it is very complicated things, and humankinds are so complicated, and also not that only one factor cannot be the independent variable to make the conclusion. So that's why we are discussing this kind of thing. So yeah, as we doing more research, and then we always going back to the data, we stacking more data to analysis and anticipate, and then that may change the answer and conclusion, I think.
Bob, what do you think? What can we do in terms of the real challenges of Mars in particular, in terms of resupply and self-sufficiency?
Well, I'd take it in a slightly different direction. Certainly self-sufficiency will apply to resources like oxygen, water, construction materials. But I'd also like us to think about self-sufficiency in terms of medical operations as well. And I say that because right now, when we fly in low Earth orbit aboard the International Space Station, for example, medical care is directed from the ground. We do have medically trained people aboard the space station, but if there should be a very serious medical situation, our job aboard the station is to stabilize the patient, and then in the next 36 hours, get them down to Earth where they can have definitive medical or surgical care in a tertiary care hospital. But we can do that because we're relatively close to Earth and we have abundant communication. That's not going to be the situation when we go interplanetary. So for example, Joe, if you're on Mars and you call to me on Earth at Mission Control to say that your crewmate Yuri has got an arrhythmia, it's going to take me 20 minutes to hear your report. And then another 20 minutes for you to hear me say to get out the defibrillator. So right away, you know that you're going to have to be self-sufficient in terms of medical operations on Mars. I'd also like us to think about that as well. Well, how are we going to deal with that? Well, first of all, I think that we're going to have self-sufficiency in terms of medical personnel that are part of the crew. It doesn't happen today where every crew has a medical doctor, but I think we need to have a broadly experienced, well-trained physician as a critical member of the crew. And then secondly, I think we need to develop in the next decades some artificial intelligence-based decision-making systems to help the onboard physician with health monitoring of their crewmates, and then also to help with diagnosis and treatment. For those of you that are the same vintage as me, then you know the original Star Trek series and Dr. McCoy with his medical tricorder. That's what we're going to need. Right. You may think that I'm overemphasizing this self-sufficiency of medical operations, but I don't think I am. I think that the maintenance of the health, the well-being, and the performance of future astronauts is really important. If we're going to accomplish very ambitious mission objectives on these first deep space missions, we need a very good crew that's productive and healthy to do that. So I like us to think about self-sufficiency in terms of clinical operations as well.
Actually, I've written on that, and one of the things is the equipment as well. It's hard to get an MRI as a part of the Mars mission. And we have all this equipment on Earth, but it's not available up there. Well, we've really come to the very close, so I'm going to ask everybody, starting with Jeff, to maybe make a final observation about challenges of going into space and coping with the problems we have.
Oh, we have so many challenges. I mean, there's challenges that are economic, there's challenges that are political, there are challenges in public opinion, you know, how much support there is. What I hope in the long run, certainly for near Earth and maybe cislunar operations, is that ultimately people are going to figure out how to make money in space. Because once you can make money doing something, you don't need the government to continually give you support. You don't have to fight the political battles every time. You know, that's the way the system works. Companies will come in, and that will ensure the sustainability of a space program. And I think we may be nearing that, both in terms of commercial tourism in space, but also the possibility, with all the research that's being done in pharmaceuticals and the like, optical fibers, actually, if we could produce something in space using weightlessness in the vacuum environment of space that can be sold at a profit for the ground, then you've got a sustainable space program. We'll have to wait. There's the fact that companies out there, private companies, are investing money in private space stations indicates that they think that there's a market out there, and I hope they're right. Ultimately, the market will tell.
Soyeon Yi. Soyeon.
Yeah, I agree with Jeff. If there is a big, huge business opportunity, we don't have to bother by the government or any kind of policy or political fight, and it doesn't mean anything because they just jumping on and invest money and then make the huge money out of it. But to do that, we need backed up data and then research and logical basement and everything we need. And then whatever big, huge business opportunity, they always have a past data stacked on by the researchers and then government institution. They did for the future. We always owe something from the past expert and then people. So this kind of communication could be like that in the future if they really make the critical decisions or thinking about that, especially nowadays. And then business and marketing are pretty much smart, and then they easily lead the people to totally opposite direction against our health and safe sometimes. So we needed to keep having discussion like that, checking all the aspect of that rather than leading by just one thing and then go totally dangerous point. But at that time, everybody running to that direction, nobody doubt about if it is dangerous or if it is good for the human kind of thing. So this kind of conversation and discussion is a really, really important role I think we should have. And if I a little bit of the add of the Bob comment about the clinical thing, and then last several years I'm working in a AI medical device company, and some people doubt about the AI might be the dangerous, and some people's fully believe and they have a fantasy about the AI, but I think it is really, really important to be the objective and then checking the AI's capability objectively, because based on the former data, AI is always better than the fresh graduate doctor or the person who just studied the profession. But they cannot be great like a 50-year-old experienced or 60-year-old experienced doctor, because humankind is so complicated. But AI is based on the trained data, but human has a kind of intuition about their health histories and relationship and mental, all that kind of things that we consider. But in a Mars or in a moon, we have a time delay. We cannot have like a MD like a Bob who is very well disciplined in the moon forever, then get the help out of the AI hybrid and then checking out with the people, even if with a delayed time. Those hybrid models always have a best benefit out of that until we fully believe the AI, and then all AI will be the much better than human. I don't know if we have at that time or not, but right now we better have a hybrid model. Thank you.
Right. Well, a hybrid of robots and AI, AI and robots, if they die, it's not the same as a human dying. And so hybrid, I think, is a key aspect of the future. Bob, what's your final thoughts?
Well, I've enjoyed a privileged career as an astronaut. The career that I had was a fulfillment of a childhood dream, and I did professionally. I did some things that very few other people have the opportunity to do. It was for someone who is kind of like a tech geek like me, with someone with a medical background. I can't imagine a more fulfilling career. But now that I'm approaching the end of my career and I've become a little bit more reflective and philosophical, I think that we have to be careful about making sure that space exploration is simply a research and development or entrepreneurial undertaking. Certainly there are some technological and operational hurdles to be overcome, and I look forward to the next generation to help us address some of these issues. But I think that's going to be the easy part. I think the hard part is managing the spectrum of partners and the diversity of interests that are seem to be arising today, so that we can, as we talked earlier today during this session, we can develop space safely, sustainably, equitably, and peacefully. It won't be easy. It'll be hard. It'll measure the best of our energies and our skills. But I think that's really, really important. Maybe the last point to make, Joe, is that I was a child of the 1960s and the 1970s. That was a marvelous time to be growing up then. We had world leaders who challenged us to go to the moon because it was not going to be easy, and it caused an entire generation to dream, to take on near impossible challenges. And I really hope the next phase of space exploration to the moon, to an asteroid, to Mars will have the same impact on society, to help raise human thoughts from egocentric, populist, parochial kind of issues to more global collaborative thoughts. And I think that's another use of space exploration to resist destructive human impulses, and I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you all very, very much. I need to turn it back to Gary. I think we're a little bit over time. Gary?
Indeed.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. And the importance of figuring out how we deal with the transition and the locus of control, both for when things work right as well as when things screw up, is going to be a critical part of, not just on the medical side, but throughout what we're doing. And it really is how we orchestrate symbiosis or shared control between people, the robots, and the advanced autonoma. All right, our next presenter is going to be Joseph Carroll, the developer of Space Tether Systems. He's going to give a presentation on homework for space settlers. Joe, you ready for us?
Okay, let's see. How do I do the share? Let's see. There it is. Okay, and whoops. Oh boy.
On your screen, there's a green shared rectangle.
Okay, just a second. Let me try this. There. Okay. Okay, let me go back to the beginning. Okay. So does that look good for you?
No
You're not
sharing here.
sharing.
Okay. And can you hear me?
We can hear you, but you're not sharing.
Okay, let me
Adriano, do you have sharing allowed for participants?
let's see
Yes,
just a minute
yes.
here.
It is allowed.
Sharing.
I think we should
I
have
don't-
asked you to send it
On
to
your on the black taskbar.
Right.
Okay, you've got
Okay.
something.
There. Okay. Very good.
Need to go. Yeah, great.
Okay. There's a lot of confidence about settling Mars with many people. And I think it's really driven by the fact that the thing that we used to regard as the big problem is probably now solvable, affordable. But that makes you have to worry about the other problems. And I think that the other problems are substantial, and that's what I'm going to be talking about. I don't know how many of you have read A City on Mars, but that's another set of homework. And in fact, when I refer to that book, I say that that's homework for future settlers. I'm going to talk about 4 different things that are relevant. The first is, can we have enough gravity for us to thrive? The 2 easiest places to get to are the moon and Mars, and they have substantially lower gravity than Earth. And unfortunately, right now, what we know is that Zero-G is bad for human health, with lots of 50 years of work on countermeasures that's very encouraging, but not completely effective. And then we know a lot about health in 1G. We know absolutely nothing about sustained health on the moon or Mars. We have 12 people who stayed 1 to 3 days on the moon, and that's the problems we found with health on the space station have been mostly 6 to 12-month stays. So we're not even close to that on the moon. And Mars gravity, you can only get something like 40 or 50 seconds at a time. So we know nothing about whether our health is going to be good enough, what countermeasures we'll still need to use, what their side effects will be, and how healthy we are. And we can, the obvious way to find this out is to actually go there. Send a bunch of people to the moon long enough to stay to see if their health is good, and the same with Mars. Or there's another option. We can learn how much gravity we need in Leo. And the concept that I have here on the left, most people envision something like a donut, von Braun donut. This is kind of erasing everything of the donut except the two short parts of the end mass of the periphery and a strut in between. Most folks who worry about artificial gravity try to use the fastest spin and smallest radius that they think the crew can tolerate, based mostly on rotating room tests on the ground. But they actually cause completely different artifacts, and those artifacts are consistent when you turn around. In microgravity, the artifacts that you get are not only different, but every time you turn around, they reverse. So we really need more realistic tests. I wrote an article about that in the Space Review 2 months ago, how to test artificial gravity. The advantages of doing this with a dumbbell rather than a donut also include the fact that it can be asymmetrical, so you provide moon gravity at one end and the counterweight's providing Mars gravity. So you can do that for 2 gravity levels, the 2 that matter in this solar system for us right now, with one facility. You don't need to put a base on the moon and a base on Mars. So other advantages, testing in Leo, just in terms of hardware delivery cost and crew delivery cost, it's probably at least a factor of 10 cheaper to do it in Leo than on the Mars or the moon. And if it turns out that we need more gravity than the moon or Mars can provide, we're going to be in something vaguely resembling an O'Neill spinning colony, and getting familiar with what spin rates we can tolerate and all that stuff is a first step. That's training wheels for spinning settlements. And then if we do these tests, some of these tests in equatorial Leo, we don't even need thick GCR shielding even for long term. The Van Allen belt doses are very low, below 10 degrees, and the GCR doses are a factor of 5 lower than, or 20% of the dose we find in the space station at the same altitude. More broadly, we started refocusing on space exploration in 2004 with a Bush W administration space policy statement that said, that focused on the vision for space exploration. And it was getting people away from ISS and LEO, et cetera. We haven't gone very far in the last 20 years other than preparing. And realistically, space exploration is far better done by robotic spacecraft, unmanned spacecraft, and they're getting better. They're evolving faster, far faster than humans and the tools we use. I think the real focus needs to be shifted away from space exploration to preparing to live indefinitely beyond Earth. And that means knowing more about what we need and what we can tolerate in space to live longer term and eventually even have families. So besides finding out how much gravity we need and what countermeasures we might need, there are 3 other bits of homework that we can do without having to go beyond Earth and Leo. One of the things that I was surprised to realize is that, the mass of waste that has been taken out of the ISS and burned up with expendable cargo vehicles, the vehicles plus the cargo are twice the mass of the ISS. Okay, and if you wanted to make ISS more sustainable, you would find ways to use that. And we do food, we do air and water, but we don't do food, and we don't recycle anything else yet. There have been some attempts to recycle plastic packaging. I don't know how they have worked. But realistically, facility waste has all the elements that you need to keep a facility going. You can't sell stuff to customers from that in any quantity, and you can't grow the facility, but you can maintain it if you can recycle. And the sketches, the pictures at the right, the real miracles have to occur in the arrows between collecting the trash and making it stuff you could buy in a Home Depot or any other store. We haven't begun to think about that, but actually we have to start heading in that direction, even on Earth. There's this concept, I think it's mostly just a concept, of a circular economy, that there's recycling, but there's no waste. Everything ends up being recycled. The problem is that that's a endpoint, and we need some terminology for the steps in between, because those are going to take a long time. Realistically, I think settlers are going to reuse everything that they can, and increasingly everything. And then they will mine and import, but there's going to be more work involving anything other than ice and other volatiles, water and other volatiles. It's going to be a lot harder to deal with that than to deal with your own trash. So that's a big deal. I think it really needs to be worked on. And the great news is you can start working on that by looking at what people are doing on circular economy on Earth. You don't even have to go to Leo yet.
Joe, 1 minute.
Okay, food production. We can test that on Earth using automated crop stuff and then in Leo. And we can join spent stages into large structures. So this is kind of a wet workshop, but tankers, Starship tankers can be designed for one launch, no TPS, no fairing, balloon tanks, add all sorts of stuff to make it easy to make Tinker Toy constructions. So where are we going to live? We don't know. I don't think there's any place beyond Earth that is easier to live in than the hardest places on Earth, excepting active volcanoes. And we have to keep that in mind. I mean, people say that Mars is the same area as the dry area of Earth, but that leaves out the fact that means that there's 2.25 times more ocean area on the Earth than there is on Mars. And we haven't even started to figure out how to actually colonize the oceans. So the real challenge is it really going to be livable beyond Earth. And we don't even know yet where we can do it, the moon, Mars, or spinning facilities. So let me just ask you to think about, where should we test low G health first? Leo in a spinning facility, or the moon or Mars? And then the other harder question is, what's harder, getting settlers to Mars or staying alive there? That's
Thank you
it.
very much.
Oh, let me mention one other thing is there's a slide of 22 references that I'm going to make this available. So anybody that wants to pursue any of these can do that.
Thanks.
Joe, thank you very much. An excellent presentation. And, I think you're calling up the need for, in channeling Paulo Solari, the need for a realized arcology. Basically, our understanding of the relationship between humans in the natural environment and the built environment. And whether or not, wherever we're doing that, we have to develop that understanding in order to
I actually visited the arcology about 10 years ago.
Arcasanti, yeah.
Yes. I talked with one teenage kid, and he was a little bit depressed by his environment. It's going to be hard. And one of the interesting questions long term is, if you stay a long time on Mars or the moon, can you even go back to Earth? And that's a serious question. And it'll be yes for some people, no for many. And how do you exercise enough on the moon to be able to go back home 5 years later? We don't know.
Indeed. Well, thank you very much. Moving on, we do need to move on to our next speaker, which is going to be Victor Motti, the president and CEO of Alternative Planetary Futures Institute. His talk is going to be on embracing planetization, a paradigm shift for global harmony. Victor, are you ready to go?
Thank you very much, Gary and Joe. And
please drop the share, Joe.
Let's see, how do I unshare?
There you go. All right, Victor.
Okay.
You've got the ball.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much again. And I'm very glad to speak here today because I have been following the space programs from a different perspective. And you will know what I'm talking about when I say different, because today I'm not talking about the technological aspects, nor about economic or even policy, but building upon what Mr. Robert Thirsk mentioned at the very end of his talk about the philosophical approach. Most of my contribution today will be focusing on the philosophical or even psychological aspect of the space community. And when I was looking at the announcement of the website of the Living in a Space Initiative, I saw the very interesting question. It was asking how to inspire future generations to reach for the stars. So my short and very fast answer could be that let's cultivate the overview effect, which is quite well known among many astronauts. I mean, looking at the pale blue dot, the effect that Carl Sagan also wrote a book about it. I mean, looking at the Earth from above, from beyond it. But the long and slow answer for that, I mean, how to inspire future generations, is to cultivate planetary identity. And I will explain more what I mean by that. So basically, right now, we are at the stage of our evolution on the planet Earth, in which we have been able to create a hyper-connected world through all the achievements of the science and technology, globalization, and all the infrastructure which is already in place. But what remains to be done further beyond this is to think about how to build bridges between the different cultures and civilizations and different sources of ideas. And there is a great opportunity to do just that. And this call is not new at all. I mean, there were some visionaries like Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who coined this term planetization, who envisioned a time in the human history or the evolution of the human civilization in which we achieve some sort of a planetization and have a planetary identity. Sometimes people looking at the science fiction literature, for example, remember that people identify like to be called I am a Terran or a Tellurian as opposed to be a Martian. And in those sources, of course, these kind of descriptions are pretty much common, but not yet as much common that we expect in the usual political discussions we have about the future of space. And this will be a very important shift. And in the sense of supporting planetization, we should note that the champions of this movement are actually poets, artists, musicians. And if you remember very well, at the very beginning of this conference today, a very nice music was played by Adriano, which is the Thus Spoke Zarathustra, and was played even during the opening scene of the very well-known movie by Stanley Kubrick, 2001, A Space Odyssey. So I'm just saying that we need, in addition to entrepreneurs, engineers, and economists and policymakers, we also need artists, poets, and philosophers to join this community and make that impact that we were experiencing during the 1960s or 1970s, when there was a huge mobilization in the society supporting this. And planetization sometimes is contrasted with globalization, because globalization is obviously much more focused on the free flow of capital, workforce, or even immigration, or technological collaboration between different countries, or innovation. But planetization is obviously more about advocating for a balance in which we also provide some space, abstract space, it's an ecosystem for flourishing of ideas. And even scientists and futurists like me, I'm coming to the space ecosystem from the experience of being a foresight or future scholar. And even in that perspective, we always are looking at the very big picture thinking. And let me also introduce probably another term to you, which is omnology. And by that, we mean that we think at the very large scale of dynamics that could happen. And it is not uncommon to think about, among engineers and scientists, to talk about atmosphere, biosphere, geosphere, hydrosphere, heliosphere. And the humanities has also contributed by saying that we also need to make sure that the noosphere is also enriched. I mean, the noosphere, the term which is spelled like NWOsphere. And so this realm of ideas and ethics and global consciousness is going to be very much helpful for creating this integral planetary consciousness that I'm talking about. So I would say that even after omnology, even we can think about mythology. I mean, if you look at the human history and the history of ideas, you see that, for example, in the Indo-Iranic mythology, they have this concept of Vayuvata, which basically is looking at those spheres as the unit of analysis. So even thinking about what could be the life beyond Earth, we can think about how to use this holistic thinking about the future of space exploration and visions associated with that. Because most of the time, So because most of the times we are focused on a human settlement in a space or discovering life beyond Earth. But looking from these alternative backgrounds or alternative perspectives, you might think about how to discover the most general conditions for biochemistry on any planet to support exotic life forms beyond what is familiar on the Earth. So if you think about it, it could provide some sort of a shift in your thinking and thinking about how to expand your horizon, not only be very anthropocentric, but also thinking about the interaction and dynamics between all the spheres that could be designed through, for example, exporting or sending out robots or other sort of machines or enabled by AI technology to find and trigger those kind of biochemical reactions on another planet to make it much more livable, not only for humans or life forms on the Earth, but exotic or very unprecedented sort of the life. So let me close with a quote from Carl Sagan today. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. And thank you very much for your time. And hopefully, if there is if there are questions, I will be glad to answer.
Victor, thank you very much for your thought-provoking presentation. The notion that situational awareness must occur at many, many different levels is something that we all need to come to terms with. Unless we are in a time-constrained situation, we'll see whether or not we've got we'll make up some time and have a broader discussion here. So we should move forward. Our next speaker is Dr. Bernard Foing, President of Space Renaissance International. He'll be speaking on Space Renaissance for All. Bernard, are you ready to go?
Yes, ready to go. So
you have the ball.
Yes, how do you do? Yes, I'm welcome from Vienna, actually, where I've been at the United Nations COPIOS, Committee for Peaceful Use of Outer Space, Scientific and Technology Subcommittee, where actually I was with some colleagues from Space Renaissance, and I presented 2 days ago our Space Renaissance International Annual Moon Mars activities, and also our initiative, Space SDG 18, that was endorsed by more than 110 institutions. But today I would like to talk about a specific aspect of Space Renaissance for All, in particular in the context of living in space, and how we could prepare for some of these activities, in particular in areas of research. So I have a presentation. Do you see it full scale? Do you see it well?
Now, yes, now it is.
Yes.
You're in good shape.
So I would like to introduce some activities that we have been conducting, partly with Space Renaissance, but also with a number of other partners that are involved in the research development in many areas that we need to address for this Space Renaissance for All. One is sharing of data and analysis of data from previous space mission, also with new techniques like AI and machine learning, developing some technologies for instrument and cooperative robotics to put them on mission, and then participate to real space missions with some payload, and then later with humans. Also, we do some work on laboratory and analog field work where we demonstrate some of this research and technologies. But more recently, also, we have embarked in the topic of space economy, where we have received a grant from 2 million from the European Union to develop career for space entrepreneurs. And this we try to incorporate also in how we can prepare in the larger ecosystem for a future living space and exploration. Also, very important ingredient, of course, is cooperation and peaceful work, in particular in this very tense task we see on Earth. And as you know, also with Space Renaissance, we have also put as a top action how to involve the cultural sectors to get art to space to the benefit of society. So now back a bit to some of the research that we have been conducting. Actually, this was done when I was at the Open Space Agency in collaboration with number groups from NASA, ESA, and from the community, where we looked at the effect of space radiation exposure on some organic molecules, living organisms. So we exposed on a platform called BioPan. It was a pan that had a number of samples that included also some fungi, some lichens, some tardigrades, various organisms that we thought could survive in space. So we did first exposures on a photon capsule for 3 weeks, and then we adapted on a larger platform called Expo that was put outside the International Space Station for 1 year and a half. And there you could see how this living organism could survive in space, so at low Earth orbit. Now, also, I've been involved in some missions that went to the moon. Actually, Smart One in this context went to the moon, and from the radiation side, it took us 1 year and a half to arrive to the moon. So we went to the radiation belt. We got a giant Halloween storm that knocked off the whole spacecraft, but it was put in safe mode. And at the end, we got 50 kilorad in our experiment where we stayed 3 years at the moon. But in the meantime, arrived at the moon, we could make some survey maps of the polar areas that are serving to prepare the next mission, robotic and human. In particular, we identified areas which are in permanent darkness at temperature of 40, 50 Kelvin, the coldest in the solar system where ice can be trapped. And we have measured later with the mission, like 5% of ice mixed with the soil. We found also some peak of eternal light. And so we studied the environment on the moon. At that time, we shared the data. So it's also peaceful cooperation in sharing the data. And we then started to engage in peaceful collaboration with other missions. So in particular, so Smart One was alone at the moon for 3 years, but after, in 2007, we had the launch of the Chang'e 1 Chinese mission, as well as the Kaguya Selene Japanese mission, which also provided very important information, science, and also for exploration. We put also some instrument from Europe on board Chandrayaan-1, and also there was some confirmation of the existence of water, ice, and on the moon with the Chandrayaan-1 MQ instrument. And we have also collaborated on mission from the US side, like LRO, Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, which is still in operation now after more of 15 years of service, with the L-Cross impactor and also other mission from the US Discovery Program and other mission from the Worldwide Committee. So clearly, the lunar exploration is a place for peaceful collaboration, exchange of data, and opportunities for instrument. And this is what we had, in fact, predicted about more than 30 years ago when we created the International Lunar Exploration Working Group in 1994, and we put together a roadmap for future exploration. We call it the Moon Village Roadmap, with robotic explorers, surface robotic village, and then human outposts leading to a permanent presence of human and robot on the surface of the moon. So what are the challenges for this Moon Village implementation? And there are some challenges that have to be addressed. And at the moment, we have several initiatives that are connected to the Artemis program led by the US, and also with a number of countries that have signed the Artemis agreement that are according actually to the Outer Space Treaty principle. But we have also the International Lunar Research Station with a large group of countries, but also institutes and individuals that are part. But for me, they are all linked to our initial vision of the Moon Village, where we have to address some technical challenge, scientific challenge, but also look at benefit for the whole society at large, the whole humanity. But technical challenges are to get there. So for there, you have some rocket companies, but also the challenge of operation in extreme environment, communications, survival of humans, and also robotic system, mobility, the use of local resources that we have mapped. So the water ice we have found, but also some of the mineral or metal we can extract from the mineral, the solar power that is present there, human robotic partnership, and also the new paradigm of having users that do not come from the space community. Either we have terrestrial industries or entrepreneurs that are investing to the moon, and you have also the new space. So from the technology side, we started already some 15 years ago to look at the next instrument after orbiters, and we built in the frame of the Google Lunar X Prize, a lander. It's called ExoGeoLab. And from this, we tested how to deploy rovers to do cooperative robotics, but also cameras, sample analysis. We tested it in some Moon Mars yards that we have at ESTEC in other places. But also we looked at partnership between astronaut and some of these devices. Astronaut can be there to repair, inspect, maintain, change instrument. And that's something that will exist when you will have a first outpost with humans, but it will be preceded by some robotic precursors, but that could be enhanced in their function thanks to the presence of human, even for a short duration of a few weeks. And then you have a robotic device that can work for years. So we have also looked how to prepare ourselves for living and working inside the moon base. So for this, we have a base that is in Poland. One of those bases is looking mostly at intravehicular activities. There you can join. We can lock you in this base without window, with a special isolation, but with a lot of experiments we are running, like physiology, biology. We are growing plants. We do exercise as well. We monitor the activities of very interdisciplinary, international, very diverse crew there. And we have made simulation with more than 24 crew, on general, on average, 5 crew participants. One example was very special. We put the first women on the moon in this base. As you know, Artemis 3, its goal is to do that. And then we had a special simulation where 2 of my students, Clara, with looking at human-robotic partnership, and Matthew is a geek looking at rovers and virtual reality. I put them together for 1 week on the moon in this base, and together with a rover, so that was the third inhabitant, they conducted a number of studies, psychological, radiation studies, virtual reality. They looked at also at their state with pupillometry. And then we had a giant solar storm that produces beautiful aurora that we have observed. And then, to be realistic, we switch off the power in the base, and they had 3 days of blackout. And they survived very well in this habitat. So now we are also conducting simulation in analogs of the Moon and Mars, also in terms of a landscape, volcanic landscape that you will encounter on the Moon and Mars. So we started with a campaign already in 2009 called Euro Moon Mars in the Utah Mars Terrestrial Station. We did some campaign also in the Etna volcano, more recently also in collaboration with the German Aerospace Center and ESA with very advanced rover teleoperated by astronauts. And we had also some small campaigns in Atacama Desert and Iceland, but we have also a base in Hawaii, the so-called International Moon Base, ICES, that have been in operation since 2015 for long duration isolation, like 1 year, 6 months, in collaboration with NASA. But more recently, we are looking at it in 1 or 2 week simulation that are relevant for preparation for the Moon program. But starting in 2009, we had some crew for 2 weeks on Mars. And there we used the Mars Terrestrial Station in Utah, where we performed some laboratory and field research. We demonstrated some special instruments that were brought from Europe, but also from NASA Ames, from JPL, and from also JSC, Johnson Space Center. And this was also the opportunity to isolate our analog astronaut to validate the habitat structure, the architecture, the power system, all the life support system, and of course the human aspect of performance, as it was mostly research-driven, but also the psychology, the working together, the EVA activities, and as well as the medical side. It was a great opportunity also for training across generation and across field, and of course to tell the story and outreach to the public and also to the universities. So we had more than 15 campaigns that were conducted there from 2009 to now. More recently, we started also. Yeah, we had also campaign in Hawaii. And so after a big eruption, we returned there. So I was there as chief scientist and with Hank Rogers, the owner, as a commander. And now we are going to conduct also research operations that are useful for future exploration. Now, we also started a project where we built a small mobile base that you can bring to your place. So it's called the Exospace Lab Express, and it has a laboratory as well, inflatable structure. If you're interested, we can bring it to your place in Europe, or we have to duplicate it to bring it to the America or Asia or Africa, which we are now working on. So it is for 4 astronauts. There is a private quarter. We have a scientific rack and laboratory. And I would like to end on a special project we have started called Space Renaissance for All Gallery. It's a gallery of artifacts using two trays that we use on the International Space Station for our experiment. But there you are going to bring not only scientific sample of astrobiology, but also we'll have 10 art space pieces that are integrated. And we have also some logos of 40 partners that we want to celebrate. So that's how the tray looks like. On the left, you have some discs that are coated with logos of great partners, United Nations, COSPA, IF, and so on. But on the right, you have 10 samples of astrobiology and 10 artistic samples that will be flown in June in the next cargo return capsule. So that's a type of activities that has to involve everybody. And so that's, I would like to end on this slide showing that these are various aspects of how we can do space renaissance for all. There is also a very important aspect, which is capacity building. And for this, in collaboration with a number of universities, 5 in Europe, but also International Space University, we developed the full curriculum where not only we have space science, space technology, but also space humanities and art, astronautics training, and we have added also this aspect of space business and entrepreneurship. So in order to train the next generation, together with the older generation, to embark in getting everybody involved and having a space renaissance for all. Thank you very much for your attention.
Bernard, thank you very much. You know, it is inspirational and very important to actually see things get done. It's one thing to talk about it. It's another to get people directly engaged. And
Yes,
you know, your efforts are to be your teams to be commended in those regards. We are in a time corner here. Our next speaker is Dr. Rosmano, you know, a medical doctor from Brazil and with the UK CEO of Innova Space. He'll be speaking on advances in space medicine, new results, and future challenges. Dr. Rosmano, are you ready to go? The ball is yours. You have to unmute.
Can you
There
hear me now?
we can hear you now.
Okay, can you see my slides?
Yes, we can see your slides. But you want to go, go to full screen. You got it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting me for this meeting. Very interesting. I also attended the one in the 9th of January, so I think that we are really doing a good job. Thank you very much. I'm a can call a kind of space doctor. I've been in this field for over 30 years now. I have a master's and a PhD in the area of space medicine and human physiology in space. The master's in the United States and the PhD at King's College in London. I worked in space agencies and I was an academic, or still an academic, working in different universities and doing lots of research related to medicine, physiology, biology, and microgravity, hypergravity simulations on Earth. I had the opportunity to participate in parabolic flights, also for research. And I tried to summarize in a couple of slides what is basically known or what are the future challenges for space medicine, which is a very niche area if you compare to other areas of space exploration. I've been to NASA many times, and you can see that the area of human space flight is very small in comparison to other areas in terms of the space centers that they have. The same happened at ESA and also where I worked for years at DLR, the German Space Agency in Cologne, and it is really a small part, I would say. Although it calls the attention of the public and the governments and so on, human space exploration is not as developed as it should be by now, because we started back in 1961 with Gagarin, first man in space, 63, first woman in space. And one thing that was clear when they went into space in the beginning of the 1960s is that we are really Earth beings. We evolved for millions and millions and millions of years here on Earth. We developed our body, our brain, to cope with our planet. So it's not just gravity, it's the atmosphere, the amount of oxygen, the need of water, and so on. We are basically Earth beings. And although we are called Homo sapiens sapiens, I think that we are becoming Homo sapiens spatial or something like that. And I think that it was discussed very briefly here. That's a philosophical question. Should we be humans living in microgravity, in orbit, or on the moon one day, or on Mars, or we are going to become a lunar being or a Martian being? Because it's two different approaches in terms of medicine. It's very important to understand that if we start living, work, and reproducing in space, we will not become, we are not going to be what we are right now. And this is, it's a philosophical question that has impact in all areas. I am going to use, as it was discussed here, artificial gravity to basically reproduce our planet or in space, or people that was born on the moon or will be born on the moon one day will be adapted to hypogravity. So this is very important in terms of medicine or physiology, this health area of space exploration. We, as soon as we leave our planet, we are in hostile environments. Of course, we can adapt because we know that, for example, any one of us, if we go to live now in Cusco, which is a very high city in Peru, we are going to suffer. If we go to live in a desert, we are going to suffer. But there are people living in these places, and they are very adapted to that place. So we are basically capable of adapting. How long it will take for us to adapt to the environment of the moon or Mars, we don't know. And it might take generations. It might go quicker than we imagine. But we are going to have very hostile environments in terms of temperature, in terms of barometric pressure, concentration of oxygen, gravity, communication aspects, and so on. So very briefly, just for you to understand that we are dealing with an environment that will change every single cell in our lives, in our body. And this is an old chart, but I like that, and I always show to my students because it brings two main aspects that are very important. First is that every single body system will react to space, to microgravity, but it will react in a different time frame and in a different intensity. Some will adapt very quickly, some will take a bit longer, and some will never adapt. So this is a very important message because it will dictate again, are we going to become space beings? Are we going to use countermeasures to counteract all these effects? And if that's the case, for how long and how intensely should we do that? Of course, that the most common countermeasure is exercise. You have three types of, let's say, equipment in space for astronauts to exercise: for the bones, the muscles, the cardiovascular system, the pulmonary system. But in any case, the best protocol for someone that is over 438 days, that's the record for continuous staying in space, Valery Polyakov, a Russian cosmonaut, we do not know. Nowadays, it's 2.5 hours per day, 6 days per week, but we are not sure if we stay longer in space, how much more we need. And of course, after we start looking at physiology, medicine, I would say a couple of decades after we start studying humans in space, we paid more attention to the psychological and the psychiatric chains. So isolation, confinement, monotony, depression, insomnia, communication issues, crude diversity is much more frequent now. In the beginning, we had a very standardized, let's say, or a kind of profile. No, the astronauts were young men from the military, and nowadays we have a huge diverse that brings lots of good things, but also some stress and tensions. We have radiation that can affect the brain, or in other words, to be in space is to be in a somehow in a dangerous environment. It's an environment that our body and our mind was not designed to live in. And as we have countermeasures for our body, we also have countermeasures for our mind. So nowadays, there is these programs of entertainment and socialization, it's music, games, meals together, celebrating something, and a birthday or whatever. So this is very important. And in the past, it was not even considered. But there are, when we talk about going to the moon, and I feel very sorry for us as space scientists, because we lost over 5 decades of knowledge. So when you left the moon in 1972, after the 6 successful landings with 2 men per mission walking on the moon, we left and we didn't basically we didn't go back, and it was a shame, because I believe that we could have much more knowledge now of how to build settlement there, or how to live there, or the influence of hypogravity in our bodies and so on. And on top of that, on top of not knowing, although we want now through the Artemis program, we want to come back and have a more, let's say, permanent base on the moon, we are also talk about Mars, and we are facing now space tourism. So there are three main things that for space doctors or space life science scientists is very disturbing, is very challenging. Because we need to remember that another, let's say, mistake that we did, not just to leave the moon for over 5 decades, but it was also the way that we start studying people in space. We just studied healthy people. And now we are talking about space tourism, people that are old or much younger, maybe can have a couple that wants to take their baby into space, or we have people that is sick and taking medication. So we have no experience with that, not even in ground-based studies. People are healthy. Some, they are not even taking medication to control hypertension, for example, diabetes, very common disease here on Earth. So we have these 3 main challenges now. Going back to the moon and trying to live there more permanently, trying to get to Mars, which I think that's much more like a dream than a reality, and deal with space tourism. I was part of a small book, a kind of manual that were designed as space doctors from different countries. It was a IAA, sponsored group, and we define, let's say, the medical guidelines for space tourism. The same week that we were having this in-person meeting, I think that was in China, Steve Hawking, who had a very important neurodegenerative disease, went into participate in a parabolic flight. And we had the pictures of someone that was unable to speak, to move by himself, to eat, etc., basically floating microgravity. So it was very clear for me in that moment that doesn't matter our guidelines, people that are famous or people that are rich or both of them, or even if they are famous and rich, which is even a worse situation, they will buy their tickets. So we need
One minute.
Okay, we need to have the support of artificial intelligence, robonauts for the diagnosis and the treatment management of disease in space. That's for sure. You need to have independent crews as much as possible. We can use this digital technology applied to health and the training here on Earth in studies trying to mimic some aspects of space missions. Like, for example, we have basically no important or knowledge related to surgeries in space. You know, and this idea that if you get sick, you stabilize the patient and send them back to Earth, it is also a kind of dream, because depending on the situation, you cannot put someone on the stress of re-entering the atmosphere and land on Earth. So it's not just to have the ambulance there, a space ambulance available. We might not have the possibility to use it. So this is my message. You know, we are basically, after, as I said, over 30 years of exposure to space medicine, believe me, I studied a lot. I worked in many different universities. I still work in different universities, and lots of research papers, patents. I think that we could be much more advanced now. We are still somehow in our infancy in terms of knowledge related to humans in space. If you compare to other areas like engineering, or if you compare to what we can do with telescopes in space nowadays, and what we know about how to live and work on the moon or Mars, or how to get there, how to protect ourselves against radiation, microgravity, are you going to become space beings? Are you going to stay like human beings visiting space and things like that? We are really not very advanced. And I'm sorry to say, but I think that Elon Musk, that wants so much to take people to Mars, I don't think that we are prepared for that. I really don't think. As a doctor, if the crew to go to Mars come to talk to me and ask my opinion, I would say that very unfortunately, I don't think that we have enough knowledge to send people into space for missions like to get to Mars and colonize Mars or whatever, or live there for a while.
Thank you very
unfortunate.
much, Dr. Rosmano. One question though. It's one thing to go through and be reactive in terms of the observations, but how far along are we in terms of the predictive model of what what needs to be done with respect to managing the human systems, as opposed to merely reacting to the changes that we observe?
We don't know much, believe me. For example, we don't know much about space pharmacy. We basically export to space the dose of medication, the intervals that you should use, let's say, 400 milligrams of paracetamol in space, but without any evidence that it will work in the same way that it works here on Earth, because we don't have enough studies. We do not have studies in many areas, and many of these studies are not integrated. We do not have studies that consider at the same time physiology and biology and genetics and pharmacy, for example, or diet. It is completely we are building, and don't take me wrong, we are building a very good set of data related to humans in space, but we are far from what we could be. We need more people involved, we need more universities. One of my goals now as a space doctor is to exactly do that. Now I am teaching via courses and webinars, different students and researchers, professors from several countries in Africa, in Asia, in South America, in Central America, because they don't even know the basics. It is something that was completely, I don't know, deleted from the medical schools or research institutes. It is a very small area And we depend on people, we depend on technology and people to basically research here on Earth in space simulations. Although I'm very critical about that, I had the opportunity to build up centers and labs with different space simulators, and we need to know exactly what they are giving to us in terms of data. I'm still doing that. I'm now in 3 or 4 different countries. I'm helping them to establish space medicine as an area of research. But believe me, it is very, very weak. We are far behind other areas of medicine. We don't understand anything related to genetics in space, for example.
Let me interrupt to say that our organization is trying to support her to give courses in countries, particularly countries that don't really have programs in this area. And anybody who's interested can go to our website at acesworldwide.org and send us a message, and we will link you up with Dr. Russomanno.
Yeah, no, please. Thank you very much, Joe. I'm part of ACES. It is a wonderful organization. I'm part of the Renaissance, International Renaissance. I think that there are very good initiatives in this sense, put people together. These seminars in general now about living in space, but we need to face the situation. We need to go to really motivate people to start studying or researching and learning about space medicine and space physiology.
But we do absolutely critical.
We do need to go on.
Yeah.
You know,
We have
articulating
also
that vision.
in our Space for All Academy, we have grants for researcher, and also we have a module, for academic credit. So we should discuss how we can go to the next stage of making it happen.
Right. But we need to go to the panel.
Yeah, the vision you articulated there is, I think, very, very important, Dr. Russomanno. And being able to integrate that as, an awful lot of medicine has concentrated on palliative care as opposed to, preventive care. And really, there's a difference between procedures, protocols, and actually managing the outcomes. And your ability to create, the integrated models that give us a predictive understanding, not only make a difference with respect to living in space, but ultimately with respect to wherever we choose to live. Okay, and it's, I think, of critical importance. Again, thank you.
And just another point very quickly. Whatever we know is much more based on male physiology than female physiology. We have around 800 astronauts, 12% are women. We don't have enough data nowadays in relation to female bodies in space, minds, bodies, whatever. So that's another very important issue, and I am very careful. Since I started researching on my first thesis, in my master's degree thesis, I had a group of men and women. I always had a group of women in my research. And if you look at my LinkedIn and my CV, it's a lot of publication, a lot of research done considering men and women in different types of physiological studies. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you very much. All right. Now we're now moving to the next segment of the program. We have the upcoming panel is an international panel of young professionals. It's being chaired by Susanker Palat. My apologies if I slaughtered your name in those regards. Please correct it. He's with the Living in Space Executive Committee, and the ball is now yours. Go for it.
Sure. Gary, can you just confirm, if you all can hear me, properly? If I'm audible clearly?
You're coming in loud and clear. Yep.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, everyone, for the wonderful insights. I believe, after the expert guidance and insights from the legends in the space industry till now. It's now time to add in the enthusiasm as well as some insights from the younger people, after all, who will be the future of the space industry. And as Dr. Thais herself mentioned, that there's a lot of work to do, especially in space medicine and other aspects of living in space. I think now it's time that the younger people also take up the baton along with the guidance from the experts. I would just request our panelists today, Dr. Eleanor Poli and Mr. Shubhrajit Barua and Mr. Ryan Kirby to just switch on their videos, and we can begin with the general introduction to each one of them. I'll just share my screen in a moment. Is my screen visible, Adriano? Or Gary, can you just confirm if
Your screen is visible,
okay,
but
okay.
you want to go to full screen. Yes, you've got it now.
Yes, it's good.
Okay, now it's better. Yeah. Yeah. I'll just go ahead and introduce our speakers today. We have Dr. Eleanor Poli and Ryan Kirby and Shubhrajit Barua, and also along with us in the panel, who is not present here live, who is from South Korea, Antonio Stark, because the time zone is quite early on his end. But it's a truly international panel of young professionals. I'm Shiv Shankar Palit, the moderator for today, associated with Life to and Beyond Foundation, ACS Worldwide, and many others like Space Q Innova Space. And we have Dr. Poli, who is an expert analog astronaut, not only an analog astronaut, but also an analog astronaut trainer. And she has finished her PhD in material and metallurgy from Cambridge University, and now pursuing postdoctoral research in additive manufacturing at CSEM and in Switzerland. We also have Ryan Kirby, who is the communications officer at Life to and Beyond Foundation and a visiting scholar at Blue Marble Space Institute of Science, alongside being a STEM teacher at the Meridian Academy in the US. We have Shubhrajit Barua from the space life science background, essentially, who is the R&D officer at the Life to and Beyond Foundation, and also is on various capacity, especially in the mentoring committee and the project group at SGS, famously known as the Space Generation Advisory Council, we know. And he has been contributing a lot in space life science domain from India, and he is currently pursuing his PhD at ITMO University in Russia. And finally, the panelist who is not live along with us, but then his inputs, valuable inputs are there with us in pre-recording, is Antonio Stark, who is actually a leading expert in space policy and security, specializing in cislunar ecosystem applications. He's currently a global alliance lead at the iSpace Incorporation and is associated with the National Space Society US and have been a recipient of many honors and many more. Okay, before, I think so it's much of the introduction, coming back to the main discussion, that's living in space. I'll just unshare my screen and go again with the discussion today. So our panelists are quite young and professional in the space sector. The very first question with regard to the living in space is, what are the emerging technologies, according to you all, that may be important going ahead in the aspect of living in space? So maybe we can start with Dr. Eleanor Poli with her inputs. Dr. Poli?
Sure. Thank you for having us today. It's a pleasure. I believe the technologies that we're really going to need if we go back to the moon and if we do go to Mars, because as was mentioned before, it's going to take quite a bit of time yet. And some of the limitations we still need in technology is medicine and digital technology. So the implementation of medical monitoring way more, and telemedicine, because telemedicine is going to be absolutely crucial due to, for example, the time delay in communication with Mars. I also believe that obviously anything that has to do with radiation shields will be way more important, because obviously on Mars we don't have a protective atmosphere, nor do we have magnetic field that protects us. And we recently realized that actually we had way more radiation than expected. So lava tubes are a solution, but you still need to get all the way down. So we need to have much better radiation protection. And I believe the last bit of technology, and it's a very hot topic right now, and it's AI, and it's the integration of AI for like kind of robotic, but also maintenance, or maybe even decision making, again, to increase crew autonomy. And this is something that we see already. Some missions are starting to implement AI integration as a like kind of psychological support for astronauts, analog astronauts for the moment, and that kind of thing. So these, I would say, are the three kind of technologies that we're going to really need for example, settlements on Mars and the Moon.
Sure, I think so. That's great inputs on these, like especially as we can connect to Dr. Thais, what she just said on the space medicine and also the AI and all, which are quite important to consider when we are talking about emerging technologies. Let's also get some thoughts from Mr. Barua. So, Barua, what do you think about the some important technologies that may be important for living in space?
Yeah, that's a great question. And first of all, thank you so much for bringing us all together on this panel. It's great and a privilege to be speaking here. Since I'm from the life sciences background and food is one of my areas of expertise, so I have been lucky enough to converse with a few astronauts. And whenever I ask them about some of the challenges or something they would like to see improved, fresh food is something that they really mention to me repeatedly. So I would say that in this current era, various organizations and NASA has also opened some calls for research in the field of 3D printing of food. So 3D printing in general is a very up and coming field that has a variety of applications in space, be it in food production or medicine, 3D printing directly on the space station or beyond. So I would say 3D printed space foods might become such a vital emerging technology in the future that it will sustain the lives of human beings when we travel far and beyond our own planet.
Mm-hmm. Actually, that's quite interesting thought when we are talking about 3D printing of food, which not only boosts the like production and the need and sustains the need for the people going for long distance travels or even to lower Earth orbits, but also the self sustenance or self autonomy that it provides to the astronauts or those space travelers or tourists. Like Ryan, do you have any like unique and different take on this particular question, like on emerging technologies that might be important for living in space?
Yeah, thanks, Pilot. And thanks everyone for having all of us. It's always wonderful to hear the unique perspectives from everyone. So I would echo a lot of what Dr. Pauly and Balra said, but instead I'll go with a different option, which is legged robots. This is one of the most like fascinating technological like shifts that we're seeing in terms of how we're going to be exploring planets in the future, right? We see all sorts of missions like NASA's Braille mission that concluded recently that I was happy to be a part of for a brief time, where we are training robots using AI to actually explore, like Dr. Pauly said, lava tubes right here on Earth. And because these are really helpful for protecting against radiation over on Mars, right? So legged robots are much better at navigating those things than our clunky rovers that we've used in the past, because they get stuck, right? And that's much more challenging to overcome. Whereas our legged robots, we have really good and sophisticated algorithms that help them adapt and overcome when they get stuck and fall over. So these will help us just explore these planets, which is one step closer to living in space. And I think just echoing also what Dr. Thais said earlier of, like Elon Musk thinks that, I'm from the US and Elon Musk proposing that, we'll be on Mars soon or whatever. Yeah, I mean, we're not there yet, right? We need to take these steps, right? And one of these really important steps is understanding where we're going, right? And these legged robots can help us do that. So, thanks.
Thanks, Ryan. Like, I think that's valid pointer and quite unique, because you mentioned about the exploration part. Like before going or taking up a journey to a place, we would like to know where we are actually going. So properly exploring that particular place would be nice. And I know about your project at NASA Braille, which works with the robots and more, which are more flexible enough to explore such planets, in caves and all, like especially like underneath the Martian surface. And there can be a possibility of future habitation maybe out there. So taking on that very project itself, a major part of your work, part of it was research, but then also communicate about what you all have been doing at the NASA Braille. So Ryan, would you like to share a bit about NASA Braille project and how it's important with regard to Martian exploration, and how can space science communication help make the general people or even the younger people aware in terms of topics of living in space initiative?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a topic really close to my heart. My background is in science.
Yes.
That's okay. Hopefully I'm audible, but this is a topic really close to my heart, as
yes.
My background is primarily in science communication, and now I'm a full-time teacher along with my other responsibilities. So one of the reasons why I think that science communication, especially involving things like living in space and astrobiology, is so important is because these fields are so diverse in their breadth, right? So astrobiology covers topics from planetary sciences and geology and chemistry and geophysics. It covers so many different fields, and psychology, right? So even branching into the social sciences. And same with living in space, right? There's a lot of overlap here in the amount of different fields they touch. And all of this stuff can be really important when you're thinking about educating young people, because we want to get them really, really interested, right? I mean, that's research continues to show that one of the most impactful things to students actually learning and being engaged in their education is being interested, right? And so if you can touch their interest with just one of those pieces, and I mean, let's be honest, right? Aliens are a pretty fun topic for kids and the youth, right? So if you can kind of lure them in and then grab onto them with one of those topics that they might be interested in, like geophysics or something, you can really get them to a place of understanding that's much deeper than they would if you just tried to lecture to them about astrobiology without going really to those places that it connects to. And I think these are just some fields that connect so deeply to so many places that kids can relate to. So.
Yes, I think so. That's quite full of you. And I think from Canada, I was just mentioning in the panel discussion like an hour ago that he grew up in the 70s and 80s. And that was quite an interesting time when, let's say, America was going to the moon, and the administration fostered that. And I think so we are now in that same position where not just America, but there are multiple stakeholders, both from the global north as well as from the global south together. Those who have sent objects to the moon and beyond. So, the first step obviously starts with the interest, and more better than space science communication through what methods and strategies you just mentioned. Thanks, Ryan. I'll just move on to discuss more about space farming and space food with Barwa. So, Barwa, can you just highlight more about what exactly can be, or let's say, what are the present status of space farming and space food, sustainable technologies that can extend to applications and living in space?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very interesting question and close to my heart as well. So as you know, space food was developed in a way that it can be preserved for such a long time, and it would be sent to the International Space Station on a resupply basis. But that severely limited the amount of nutrition present in them because they're not fresh, and also the techniques used for conserving them for a long time affected that. And it also is not very suitable to the tongue palate, like the taste palate of the astronauts. They want the freshness of the food, the crunch. So taking all of those points into consideration, several organizations, several countries are now focused towards attempting to grow fresh fruits, fresh vegetables directly in space on the International Space Station. So just for an example, NASA's veggie experiment was quite successful in creating lettuce and other greens on the space station. There's also Japan that's attempting to grow rice in microgravity conditions. The Netherlands is looking towards developing the vertical farming system, the LED farming using LED lights and other technologies for space. And I would also like to mention China's recent success in producing oxygen on board the Tianwen space station with their Lunar Palace 1 experiment, which I think again is a big game changer, because until now we thought we lack producible oxygen and we have to focus on cultivating crops on the space station or on space from a different angle. But now if you're able to produce oxygen right there, then that opens up a lot of new avenues. And I think technologies like hydroponics and aeroponics, these are coming a great way in enhancing how we can produce food, and also in a very sustainable way that can also solve a lot of challenges on Earth. I feel we are facing a crisis of food production in terms of land or producibility, fertility. Such challenges can also be addressed by these advancements and technological breakthroughs that we do for space. So I think that's the current status. And I'm also trying my humble attempt at developing some sustainable farming system that hopefully, with the guidance and advice and help from all of you, might one day find its application in the space to produce some fresh foods. Yeah, so fingers crossed for that.
Absolutely, we will be the first customers to buy those. And I think so, like this pointer, like space business, which can both serve the space needs and also have applications on Earth, can eventually lead to more sustainable options where the private parties don't have to care much about the government and the bureaucracy and all. So that's a very good point. Thanks, Barua. While we have been discussing about what has been happening in space and what can happen in space and all, I think we come back to Earth and also understand how trainings and facilities here on Earth actually can help a lot in help us live in space. And that's obviously analog mission training. Okay, and I think Dr. Bernard has touched a lot on that aspect, but then we also have another wonderful expert on that. That's Dr. Poli, who has been doing a lot of work in this direction. So, Dr. Poli, can you just shed some light on the importance of analog space missions and some developments with regard to living in space on that?
Of course, as it was mentioned before, we're not ready yet to go to Mars, and it's going to still take some work to go back to the moon and settle there. And it costs a lot of money. It's dangerous. It's difficult. And analog space mission are just this perfect test bed to test all those conditions and also to train people. And it is really fantastic to see that some tiny training, some tiny changes to your environment can already prepare you partially for this, for example, isolation or the lack of, independence in the kind of experiments you have to deal with. By implementing already a flight plan and locking you in a bunker, we can already simulate part of what it is to be an astronaut. And there's so many things, so many variables to test. Also, as was mentioned, space is absolutely huge. There's so many things to check. It's mental health, it's psychology, it's physiology, it's robots, it's material science, it's life support systems. And while in analog missions, you can't really reproduce microgravity conditions, you can do a little bit by underwater analogs, but for the astronauts, they can't be just all the time doing diving, right? This is just not going to work. Your skin is going to peel off after some time. But you can really simulate quite a wide array of those conditions. And these are really important to really prepare us for this. And for example, with CHASM, so Community of Human Analog Space Mission, we organized a conference. Bernard Form was actually there, so it was quite nice. And we had Romain Charles. He was a participant of the Mars 500 missions. And for those of you who don't know, those missions were over 520 days long. And this is basically almost the longest space mission in the world. And they were really simulating going to Mars, being there, and then coming back. And what came out of this is most of them, they were not necessarily depressed, but they were sleeping more and they were less active. And this was like the best insight we have about being so far away for so long with a time delay, because of course you have people away for doing the war, etc. You have some conditions of isolation from your loved ones, but conditions as close as we can from being far away. There was, I think, the longest space flight was only 417 days. So those trainings are absolutely crucial to really cover like the biggest extent of what's the microgravity. Of course, it's difficult to simulate on Earth, but all the rest we can do, and this is really, really important. This is really crucial to prepare us for the future.
Absolutely. There has been so many case studies like where analog astronaut training has helped actual astronauts that there's like no like sense of doubt that should come as to its importance in this. And I think so. Dr. Poli has her initiative CHASM, the community on human analog space missions, where she works on these trainings as well as brings together resources like for people interested in analog space missions and all. Feel free to check out from our audience, those who may be interested. And we also have one more panelist who has shared his valuable input. We would just like to take a few minutes for his to hear out his inputs. I think so. Some has already been highlighted by our current panelists, but then I'll just share my screen and we can look forward to his inputs as well.
Antonio, as a young space professional yourself, can you please share some emerging space technologies that you feel are important with regard to human habitability or habitation in space? Because after all, it's a forum of living in space we are discussing here.
There will be so many technologies that we can name here, but again, from my personal background, I will kind of be talking about human life in cislunar systems because that's where we will see the most near-term human habitats being built there. One thing is definitely going to be AI because we will need AI not just to support human life, but also to prepare human life. A lot of the companies that are out there that are trying to build human habitation systems relies on autonomous robots. They rely on autonomous navigation as well as autonomous communication between satellite systems, and AI will allow us to drive that. AI doesn't simply mean smarter AI, and AI is a term that is used very widely, but a lot of times it simply means advanced algorithm. And for when we're talking about space systems, it's not necessarily about your most powerful algorithms, but it's so much more about your most efficient algorithms, simply because computing power in space is very limited. The environments are very harsh. We probably won't be able to use the latest chips or the latest hardware there because again they need to go through a very thorough verification and validation procedures. So it all kind of boils down to what kind of hardware and what kind of algorithm that uses the least amount of power, the least amount of memory and data, and can still deliver the minimum requirements for us to do things to support human life in space. So that's one thing. Another thing that you will see a lot will probably be 3D printing. And I have somewhat of a mixed feeling about this. 3D printing will definitely be a game changer for us because that allows us to use the materials and the resources that is out there in space instead of having to bring everything from Earth. And it will help us significantly in building things like constructions and large-scale structures like solar panels or scaffoldings, etc. At the same time, people tend to kind of use 3D printing very similar to AI as a golden tool that can do everything. That is really, really not true. Even though we will take a lot of the ingredients from space, please know that a lot of 3D printing technologies out there still uses some additives or some mixes into lunar regolith or to any other materials out there in space to make sure that it can be 3D printed. So there is still some quantity of materials that still needs to be brought from Earth. And also 3D printing is usually a very energy intensive procedure. And once you're in space, you know and understand that energy is a very limited commodity. So again, AI and 3D printing, these are again going to be very powerful game changers. At the same time, they are quite hyped, and a lot of people do try to use them beyond what they can be reasonably expected to. So definitely take it with a grain of salt.
Yes, I think so. Like the two technologies that you emphasized on, the AI and the 3D printing, they're quite, without doubt, will continue to form an important part when it's coming to human habitability, because we know nowadays there are several instances where we see where self-autonomy as well as such technologies like the AI and all are very well required. Just to follow up on that, like given we are here a panel of young professionals, it becomes very imperative enough to discuss that. What's your thought on the role of younger generation like you and many more, be it professionals or let's say enthusiasts going to be professionals, to contribute or advance the space sector as a whole?
We have, I believe that we as young professionals, we have a mandate to make sure that space is a peaceful environment and is also an inclusive environment. Like, again, the people who have determined the policies now, people who are leading organizations now, they may or may not actually see themselves in space in the near future. But for our generation, people who are in our 20s or in our early 30s, there's still a very, very good chance that we will see long-term and sustainable human habitats in low Earth orbit or on the moon within our lifetime. This is our future. This is going to be the environment and the global policies that we will live in. And what we do and say right now will definitely make an impact for us and also for our immediate next generation who are in their teens or who are in their preteen ages right now. You have seen that there's a lot of conflicts that are going on these days. Globally, there's a lot of diplomatic risks going on, and trying to navigate those streams to make sure that space can be, again, a stage. It can be a frontier for technological prowess. It can be a fair stage for companies and governments to come and compete with each other. At the same time, that fairness will need to be moderated by a sense of inclusivity and diversity that we have really treasured and try to foster in the last decade. Again, diversity is our strength. That is what makes us, the humankind. And everyone, like, if you go, I mean, I know we have just heard from astronauts, and I know that they will keep on saying again and again that space is a uniting factor. It makes us realize that Earth is a finite resource. It is our home, our planet, for as long as history goes. So far, it's been the only planet that life can survive on, and we want to make sure that that can be maintained into outer space. And competitiveness needs to maintain, but as people who will end up living there or will see our immediate families and friends living there, the responsibilities of ensuring that diversity and inclusivity is really up to us. It is up for us to demand that in the current space sector. It is up for us to demand that for our current leadership, and also to make sure that we take up positions of leadership where we can really be vocal about these demands.
Yes, I couldn't agree more on this particular aspect that you mentioned of diversity and inclusivity, celebrating and cherishing them. It's important for young generation like us to keep that values and also go towards becoming a part of the greater space sector, because in the very recent instances we have seen in the changing of governments and issue of orders and so on, how things have been affected significantly globally. And it becomes very much obvious that if you want to continue that very spirit of, let's say, like space for all, or let's say space for all of humanity, they should come from the younger voices. So that's very much apt enough from your end. You have been as far as your background is concerned, you have been associated with many organizations as well as many capacities in terms of fostering collaboration and cooperation, and many more. And as a strategist yourself, you even are an important advocate for that. So what is your thought on how important is global space cooperation is when we are talking about having this aspect of living in space? Because as a humanity have to go together, not just one country or one stakeholder. So what's your thought on global space cooperation?
It is, again, very imperative, but it will be very difficult and difficult to navigate the different streams out there. Again, competition is what makes us stronger individually. Competition drives down cost. Competition bolsters each other. Fair and open competition allows emerging actors to really take a foothold in the upcoming market and identify new niches that they can contribute to. At the same time, cooperation is what really kind of enhances. Like if you, again, it's always in the economy, there's competition where we want to make sure that we stay at the top of our game. We make sure that the latest technologies can be developed and pushed into society, where it's about like, it's about carving out more of the pie, but it's cooperation where we can actually just increase the size of that pie overall. It increases the size of the type of missions that we can work on. It enhances the type of science that we can bring back to humanity. It is something that we have seen in space missions and again, when scientists come together to share data, to collaborate on missions, we become more resilient, we become more adaptable. And as we go into the far frontiers of space, especially the polar regions of the moon, or to the asteroids or to Mars, we will understand that no single government or no single company can really determine this, especially when we have astronauts on board. Like when it comes to human life, we understand that every single human life, no matter the background, no matter the nationality, is valuable. And if that comes into danger, we will be there to help them out. But we shouldn't wait for a crisis to happen for us to start global cooperation. Global cooperation is something that we need to prepare prior to crises so that we can prevent a crisis from happening, or when it happens, we are far more ready to do so. Again, I have my background in for 3 years as an officer in the military, and what I've seen again and again is how much training and practice is essential for us to prevent and be prepared for crises coming up. Better global cooperation, better alliance making really allows us to make sure that human presence will be resilient, it will be sustainable, it will make sure the ecological prosperity on Earth can be preserved, our cultural heritages can be extended into outer space without compromising the values that we have here on Earth.
Absolutely. I think so. Like this point sums it up all that you just mentioned, that means competition is important, but at the same time, collaboration can help us build resilient and sustainable, let's say, I would say civilization ahead beyond our own Earth to, let's say, orbit and other planets or moons and so on. So I think so. Like that's very kind of you and very insightful things that you have just mentioned. And I would just like to thank you for all the inputs. And here we wrap up with this inputs. Thank you.
That's a lot of inputs as we got from Antonio. I would just like to wrap up with our 3 panelists present with us today with just one, and would like to ask them to keep it short in one line maybe. What do you all think is the role of younger people in the space sector? So we can go with Dr. Kohli first.
Who should start? Should I go ahead? Or
yes, sure.
The younger generation was born with globalization, and from what we've learned with the Apollo-Soyuz mission, I think it's something that we can recreate in space, which is that in space we are human and hopefully not separate nations anymore. So hopefully the future generations will keep that in mind and with them.
Thanks. Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, the role of young people in space is kind of twofold. One is that it's important to, foster these new minds, right? These new people with new perspectives, and especially in an age where we're really approaching a lot of more diverse voices in the space industry, right? So as young people come up into this new space industry, it'll be so much more diverse with perspective and opinion and background. So I think that's maybe the biggest one. And then the second is, then once these young people have all these perspectives and all this knowledge, right, to become the new experts, right, the new generation who will help us find more space technologies and spin-offs to help us here on Earth, right? I mean, there's a huge snowballing effect that happens as we power up these young people to learn about and embrace space. So
thanks, Ryan. And finally to Barua.
Yeah, great points from Dr. Kohli, Ryan, and Antonio as well. I think one characteristic that human beings have in prime position is curiosity. And curiosity has led us to do everything that we have done so far. And in all of us, especially the youth present here today and those in the audience and everyone around the globe, have it in surplus. We are curious beings, and that is what motivates us to learn more, to develop new things, to find new ways. So I think we as younger people should keep that curiosity alive and should pass it on into the next generation so that they are also hungry enough and curious enough to look up at the night sky and ask questions, because ultimately living in space will be driven by our curiosity, and once we are curious, we will find a way to live anywhere in the universe.
Yes. Thanks, everyone. And I think we have already passed the time, but then with that note, with the Living in Space initiative, I think we can wrap up with the young professionals panel for today. Over to you, Gary. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much to you and to all the panelists for participating. This is a reminder, if you check in the chat, there is a link that was sent out to a Google Drive box. So any charts that anybody has, please put them in there. We appreciate that. As well, if there's any other resources or papers that reinforce what it is that you've had to say, we're welcome to include those as linked resources. In the what will amount to be a repository based on the agenda of the meeting. Okay, our next speaker is Dr. Werner Grandl from Austria. He's on the Space Renaissance International Board, and he's going to speak on the issue of an industrial factory in L5. Dr. Grandl, you have the ball.
Thank you very much for having me. I hope you can hear me clearly. Well, okay. First of all, let me say that I am very happy that we have so much young people here who are interested in spacefaring, and I hope they will be successful in their lives. I am a retired engineer and an architect, and now I will share my screen. I'll try that. Just a moment. So this will not happen at all. Okay, that's not this. I have to do it once again. I'm sorry. Okay, now I will give you a presentation. I think I can start the slideshow. Okay, I think you can see it.
Yes.
Yes.
Go
Okay.
ahead.
So, okay, I go try to go ahead and to keep it short. So, my theme is to build a space factory in the Lagrange point L5 of the Earth-Moon system. What are the tasks of a space factory? The tasks are processing of lunar and asteroid material, collecting and processing orbital debris. We have now about 8,000 metric tons of orbital debris in space. Then extracting iron, aluminium, titanium, and other metals from lunar and asteroid ore. Then the production of building material like steel bars, aluminium panels, etc., and of course, fuel and propellant for rockets. Then the transport of semi-finished products to construction sites in the Lagrange points and in Earth orbit. The Earth-Moon system and its 5 Lagrange points are providing an equilibrium of the gravity forces of Earth and Moon. as you see in this picture. In L5 or also in L4, a Lagrange space factory would be in a stable position. The industrialization of cislunar space will start with the mining of the moon. The proposed Lagrange space factory will start with processing lunar material, regolith, to transport the raw material from the lunar surface to lunar orbit. An electromagnetic mass driver can be used. This technology was proposed by Gerald K. O'Neill in the 1970s. And subsequently, unmanned cargo ships will transport the material containers to L5. Now, what are the most important minerals in the form of oxides on the moon for heavy industry in space? Is, of course, aluminum, iron, titanium, and chromium. For example, hydrogen can be reduced from the mineral ilmenite, and with electrolysis, we can get of course, oxygen and hydrogen, which needs, of course, a very great amount of energy. Then, in a second step, we will have asteroid mining. This is, I think, a crucial challenge of our future. There are some geochemical groups for meteorites and asteroids which carry a lot of material for the industrialization of cislunar space. Approximately 18,000 near-Earth asteroids have been detected so far. Those are the so-called Amors, the Athens, and the Apollos. The Athens, as well as the Apollos, are the most interesting of them because they are approaching Earth very, very near. So, the construction of a Lagrange space factory in L5, the structure starts with the rotating habitat for a crew. It is on the left side, and along the central construction axis, the non-rotating manufacturing models are built. The structure, of course, can be extended along its central axis. Here you see on the left side a cross-section of the Lagrange space factory, and here you can see a few. Now, the hierarchy of this Lagrange space factory, of course, the human crew gives order to artificial intelligence and robots, which help humans in this factory. To establish the proposed Lagrange space factory, some precursory steps are necessary within the next years. First of all, a new orbital station in Leo, which is or maybe succeeding the ISS, and we prefer simulated gravity, of course. Then a manned lunar base with the electromagnetic mass driver, and then a first stage of the space factory to process lunar material and space debris from Earth orbit. Maybe this will happen around the year 2045. Then around the year 2060, maybe the mining of near-Earth asteroids will start. And in the second stage of the factory, the processing of asteroid material will also start. Now, once again, the pictures. Yes. In the long run, in my opinion, all mining and heavy industry could be shifted into space to minimize pollution and climate warming on Earth. This may be a little bit science fictional, but I think in the long run it would be possible. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much as well for your presentation.
Thanks.
In terms of how we have set up, we are past time in those regards, but there's certainly like to afford the opportunity if there's some general questions or concluding remarks that people would like to have. Bernard, you raised your hand.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so thank you very much for all the speakers for the organization of these two events, which were very instructive and also that are launching also inspiration for follow-up events. You mentioned, okay, we have also not only to talk, but also to have some action. So some of the action can be to present as well in some of the events of this year. So I put in the chat, we have the ability also to meet at the IF Spring Committee meeting in Paris, where we prepare ISC, but also we have a lot of technical and also administrative activities where we could go further. We have also the International Space Development Conference in Orlando on 19th, 22nd of June, and Space Renaissance International, together with the National Space Society, we are planning some sessions where you are all welcome. And of course, think of the International Astronomical Congress in Sydney on 29th September to 3rd of October, but in particular, the abstract deadline is the 28th February. And also the deadline for the candidate for emerging space leader is tomorrow, if you want to put your dossier. So think of that. And so that could be also an opportunity to present as well some of the ideas that were shared here. But also we would like very much to see how some of the ideas or concepts that were presented here could also generate some pilot project. So with Space Renaissance and also with our collaborators from Euromoon Mars, if you have some project you would like to continue, or we have mentioned some analog astronaut campaign we are conducting in Poland. We have also some activities where we develop our own mobile laboratory. If you would like to make use of it and expand this to other continents, please contact me and us, and let's work on some pilot project where we can show how we advance in this research and development towards living in space. So on behalf of Space Renaissance, thanks everybody.
Joe?
Yes. Well, just very quickly, I think we will plan a future event, online presentation, perhaps in April. But most significantly, we have booked facilities for a workshop so that we can present papers in much more depth than we are able to present today. That will be 13 to 15 November, and sites will be, information will be on our site, livinginspace.org. And I do believe that, Adriano, you have an announcement as well.
Adriano?
Yes, thank you very much. Well, I have to say that this meeting today was very, very interesting. And we touched important points, and we are talking around the central point, that is to how to allow civilians to work and live in space, and so to start the civilian space development. One of the speeches before said that when companies will go, sorry, they are ringing my bell. Just 2 seconds.
While he's away, one of the things that I wanted to stress and that I think is critically important about the Living in Space initiative is getting through on the fact that we need to be able to provide for coordination,
I'm sorry.
cooperation, collaboration, and competition. And that is a critical part of how it is that we can move forward. Okay, Adriano.
Sorry for the interruption. No, somebody says, and forgive me because I don't remember exactly who, that now the companies will enter in the game in the cislunar space, and that will push everything to have a solution. Well, I agree in part with this statement because, of course, when the market gets in and the profit start to work, then everything starts to work. But I wouldn't say that at this point the responsibility of the space agencies and of the scientific community will be relieved, and we can say, okay, let the market do, let the companies do all the work. It's not so, because often the companies are even worse than the governments in treating the life of their dependent workers. So we cannot be sure that companies will take care of protection of the life of their workers in space, and protection of the health, and to ensure that there will be green environment in space habitats, because we cannot live in iron cans for a long time and so on. So I think the task, the duty of the space agencies, of the scientific community is not ended at all. And I want to say that these issues of the protection of life and of Earth in space don't have the necessary priority yet. So I think our task as the space community, the space advocacy organization, that we are trying to help the kickoff of the civilian space development, is to always point the focus on this thing, that we need higher priority to be given to simulated gravity, for instance. In 60 years of space exploration, we don't have any experimentation of simulated gravity. So Joe Carroll said about that, about the tether and so on. And also the protection from radiation, from sun radiation and from cosmic radiation. So I think, yeah, with respect, and I'm going to close, to our third World Congress that we had in 2021, when we made the list of the 12 priority goals, that was one of the main one was to accelerate research for protecting life and health in space. I think this is still the priority, and we have to help humanity to go outside Earth in the safest possible way, and to ensure that we be able to live and to reproduce ourselves and so on. So very much excellent speech by Dr. Thais Russomano and the other speakers that have talked about that. So, okay. So thank you very much. I think ACES Worldwide and Space Renaissance have initiated this program, this initiative for living in space, and I think it's going well, even maybe better than what we expected. And so let's go ahead. Thank you very much.
Great. All right, Joe.
Bye.
Thank you all very much for participating. Please remember to send your presentations to the Google Drive. Thank you.
Okay. So it's over?
Yeah.
It's over? Okay.
Space Renaissance forward.
Space Renaissance for Ad Astra.